Chapter 6 Flight and Fate AD 1177, 3rd January. They had walked as far as the Ferdrop, a lake where the path forked in two directions, and they would take the northern one to get to Quailville. They didn't have to worry about supplies in the meantime, because fortunately a fourth person had joined them. A slender merchant, who was stroking his tapered short beard between thumb and forefinger. And while Asar, together with the merchant's loaded donkey, drank refreshment from the cool water, the boy played in it with his bare hands. The wanderer tilted his head at this sight. Had he ever tried something like this? He had filled up his canteen there, yes, but this? Then he remembered how Akira had once visited him, when they were little and he lived in Aston. Lived. He put in inverted commas in his mind, but that was such an experience. She had made him play with her in the water. Now that they were grown up, however, that would probably have been unthinkable. Too many other things involved, especially when one was naked in the process. Meanwhile, the boy had taken the head of an acorn and pretended it was a flagship of the consecrated blade fighting sea monsters, fir branches. The wanderer held his thumb from his fist to his lips. Just then it seemed to him that adults really made everything only more complicated. This fellow, who didn't seem to mind the cold in the slightest, took things head on. But who among the adults would sit down by such a lake, especially when it was teeming with people, and start playing like that? And with such joy too? Something in him longed for this joy, he couldn't deny that, but equally he could not grasp it. It's as if the magic had been lost on him. But when he thought back to his time in Aston... Hey! The merchant's voice finally interrupted him. Could we move on already? Haven't we had enough of a break? The wanderer gestured with his head towards the child. Apparently not yet. It's nice that the boy is having such fun, but eventually they'll eat from my supplies because they've been dawdling around like this and theirs will be used up halfway to Quailville if this keeps up. The merchant took a step closer and was now standing right next to him. And I might add that I am not willing to pay the full price for my escort to Robinford if I arrived there late or my help had to be enlisted to do so. After all, I was under the assumption that I was paying you for your help. The wanderer took his hand from his mouth. Alright. Then he called for the attention of mother and child and made it clear that they had to move on. In any case, it was a matter of finding a suitable place to sleep until nightfall. But at least the weather seemed merciful. There were no clouds in the sky. The evening sun was shining and the wind was blowing gently, if at all. It should be a quiet night. So he took Asar by the reins, and they all set off again. Here, too, the paved path was barely distinguishable from the rest of the way due to the fallen snow in some places. Do you think... The boy began to speak to him. Do you think you could show me one of your swords? They aren't toys. I just want to have a look. No. Oh, why not? I just told you. But it never hurts to look. It starts with looking, kid. But do you know what weapons like these actually just are? The child shook his head. Means to an end for people who are too stupid to reason. But you can also animals! Or monsters! Yes, monsters! You can kill them with that too! What kind of monsters? Well, something like Crookslangs, for example? Don't talk about that, the merchant now interjected. Merely speaking of bad stuff can jinx our way and conjure up evil things. I have no need of such thieving creatures. Really? Spoke the mother. Leave the man alone and come to me. He doesn't bother me, retorted the wanderer. But, he said, addressing the boy, in order to not upset the merchant, we should really rather talk about something else. Okay, then, about what is the biggest monster you have ever hunted down? What do you see as a monster? Well, all the things with teeth like that. He stretched his arms as far up and down as he could. And claws. He tightened his fingers. Fire-breathing dragons, that is, and... Will you stop talking about such things? The merchant demanded more urgently now. You're going to get us into trouble. I wouldn't mind to see a dragon like that, the wanderer said. From a suitable distance. I guess, however, that the consecrated blade has been busy making sure that there's none left. Why? The boy asked directly. The wanderer stroked Asar's shoulder before he began to tell. He beckoned the boy closer to him. You said yourself yesterday that if you were a soldier of the consecrated blade, you would protect the king from black dragons, didn't you? Exactly, and I'm not lying. So then you know about the curse that is supposedly on the king. I only know what my mom told me, that the king doesn't like black dragons, or black ones least of all. There's supposed to be a curse on the king's family. Did you know that Lonar Aston, the father of the reigning king, was looking for the Black Patriarch to take revenge on him? Who then is the Black Patriarch, and take revenge for what? According to many legends, the Black Patriarch is the most powerful dragon that exists on Nekartazul. Or was, because some say he died a long time ago. Others claim that he is still alive and is only waiting for the day when he can hunt down the last king, the last remaining member of the Aston bloodline. Lonar Aston wanted to take revenge for the fact that the Black Patriarch killed his father, Aston of Aston, at that time. Why did the Black Patriarch do that? How can one be so evil? Things are sometimes not as simple as they appear at first glance, little one. I myself do not know what happened then. For what it's worth, Aston of Aston may as well not have existed in the first place. Just like the Black Patriarch. And dragons may well be nothing more than an invention, a figment. At the next words he waved the fingers of his right hand in front of the boy's face, to put bad boys like you to bed when they should be sleeping. Well, that's not true at all. I'm not bad, and so far no dragon has ever come to put me to bed. The child had put on a brooding expression. You remind me, however, of a story I overheard once in a conversation between two men. They were standing outside the tavern in our village talking about the black wolf and how he owned the night and if you disturbed him. He made a croaking sound as he slid his fingers along his own throat. Okay, the black wolf at least is real, the merchant complained and had joined them. And I really, really have no desire to encounter a monster like this. At these words the woman looked first at him and then at the wanderer. She was not smiling and it was hard to read anything from her gaze. Whereupon the wanderer replied, Then maybe we'd better be quiet for a bit and let the birds chirp. In the night 2 owls tossed toot-toots to each other behind and in front of them. The boy watched tensely as the wanderer built a fire and the woman and the merchant sat there quietly a little way off. The latter had tried to ask her what let her out of the Furdale, but she remained silent. In general, he had the feeling that he was traveling with a screwed-up group. But at least they hadn't proved to be cutthroats so far. You make the fire on stones, he now heard the wanderer explain further to the boy. That's important so that the ashes fall between the stones, once the fire is burning, you understand? The boy nodded attentively. He squatted there with his elbows propped on his knees, resting his chin on the pads of his hands. This way we prevent an ash pit from forming, which already means less smoke. To make even less smoke, it's best to use the driest wood you can find. And you don't start the fire with huge pieces of wood. You only put them in when the fire is big enough that it burns directly and doesn't start flickering first. How do you know all this? The boy asked in amazement, looking up at him as if he were a twinkling star full of hope and light. The wanderer pursed his lips and shrugged. Well, I got around a bit here and there. Read a lot in my childhood. Really? If books make you so smart, I want my mom to teach me how to read too. You can read? The merchant now asked the woman in turn, astonished. Yes, she returned dryly. Are you in business? What do you mean? Well, employed, madam. Do you work for someone? She bowed her head. No. Are you familiar with numbers? Yes. Rule of 3? Yes. Excellent, the merchant exulted. When we arrive at Cryville, what do you think of talking to me about a job in accounting? She straightened her gaze and regarded the man for a while. Well, she finally admitted meekly, a paid job would suit me very well. Well paid. You will be paid by performance, you will see. Why do we have to keep a smoke-free fire anyway? The boy asked while the two started talking business. Grumbled the wanderer. Are you afraid? I don't want to be afraid anymore. I want to be brave like you, so I can protect my mummy. The wanderer pointed his index finger into the darkness. Here, surrounded by a cluster of trees and capped by bushes growing around the rock, a little of the silver light of the moon shone down on them, but this did not reach far into the forest. There's one thing out there besides wild animals. Bad people. Bad people? Like my father? That's hard to say. Worse, I would think. People who enjoy killing, you know. Murderers? He stammered anxiously now. Do you know the word cutthroat? I've heard that before, when merchants and customers talk to each other, sometimes. Out here, that's exactly what the word says. He realized that this was not an appropriate topic for a lad of that age, and yet this one had to spend the night out here with him, the merchant and his mother fleeing from a tyrannical man. How much of his childhood had the boy already lost because he had to grow up so early? Do you think something could be dangerous to us? At this point, the Wanderer put an arm around the boy and pulled him close. We are pretty dangerous ourselves, don't you think? If you think about it, it's safer here right now than the nights you had to spend at home with your father. The boy's gaze wandered on the floor. Then he looked up at the young man and replied, You are right. He nodded confidently at the child. In the next hour, the woman had prepared the dinner, and the merchant even gladly added some of his supplies to make a delicacy out of it. It was spices that were touted in Arashkar, something, he said, that one would otherwise only get to taste at Kurt in Aston. Indeed, the soup was not bad, if a little spicy, but it was hot, and to have that in the belly was worth a lot out here. So invigorated, it was much easier to brave the winter night. Although the mother wanted to fetch Billy afterwards, he decided to stay with the Wanderer. Won't you sleep? The child wanted to know, while his mother and the merchant had made a shelter for themselves out of cloths and other souvenirs and were now each lying in their own little place. If I were alone, he whispered, I might do that. Are you watching over them? He looked to the boy. Not over you. Then the child raised his little fist to his chest and said, I'll watch over them too. The Wanderer ruffled his hair with his right hand. How could I forget? He replied to the boy with amusement. The end of the story, however, was that the child soon fell asleep leaning against the Wanderer, muttering before he did so that he wished he were his father. That night, the Wanderer felt warmer than usual, and that was not because of the fire, nor was it because of the food. He knew this warmth. It had paid him an occasional visit in the past, quite sporadically to say nothing of infrequently. He was glad that they would go their separate ways after arriving in Quailville. He could remember how the sun had already risen. Then he had blinked, but apparently he had become quite bad at opening his eyes again afterwards, because now the sun was already quite a way above the horizon. As usual, he had fallen asleep with his shoulder leaning against the pommel of his sword, but since all the others were already awake, he wondered if they had tried to wake him or were just waiting. In his mind he chastised himself for being so weak. He could not rely on such luck. After all, one of them might still turn out to be a member of the consecrated fleet, and he did not want to know what awaited him in Aston, aside from what was already clear and more than enough. Had a restless night? The merchant asked with a grin. Morning more like it, the Wanderer replied. While I was still awake, you were all still asleep. I'm just saying, because you were talking in your sleep. Something about Percy. Didn't you know that people can talk in their sleep? If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But do not insult my intelligence because of it. The Wanderer grumbled. Finally, he averted his gaze from the merchant and turned to Assar. Patting the latter's cheek, he greeted the animal. Shortly afterwards, he announced to the group that they were continuing their journey, without responding to the good morning from the woman and the boy. Something in him urged him to travel alone again as soon as possible. The clouds clustered above them, and only rarely did the sun manage to send a ray through. Of course, the wind was blowing colder again today, and all that yesterday's soup did now seemed nothing more than a brief respite which, being so recent, had now given way to enormous longing. At least there was the opportunity for a hot meal this noon as well. It was not long, however, before the boy began to complain of aching feet. It was late afternoon when a woman asked the Wanderer, Can't we take a rest? Not now, the latter replied curtly. Why are you in such a hurry all of a sudden? There's a bloody wolf!